Good morning. I am, of course, delighted to be here with you today to share my thoughts on cultivating, immersing ourselves in delight, and how writing, poetry in particular for me, although it might be different for you, is a way to preserve delight and to keep that little miracle of the bright yellow bird that you've never seen before and may never see again at the top of our minds, and to be able to access that again and again and again. So I'm going to talk all about preserving delight, which makes it sound like we're making pickles or jams or jelly, like we're stocking the root cellar for winter, and maybe we each in our own way are. So delight is something that you can take as though it's a gift being offered, or something you can find, which hints at the thrill of discovery. We can in turn bring delight to others, as though we're bringing our best dish to a potluck picnic. Or we can be filled with it, like we're brimming over like a cup. Delight is a pretty expansive concept that covers a lot of territory. Up until relatively recently, though, delight has been a word in decline. It reached peak historical usage in the 1820s, and from there on took a precipitous dive. And it's only just begun to recover a little bit since the mid-90s. So we're on a present uphill, moderate climb in usage, which I hope is indicative of our willingness to let delight into our lives. I hadn't realized until thinking about this how often I use the word delight myself. I'm always looking for a word that's affirming to use with the children I work with, and often delightful is one that works. As an English major and a librarian, a lot of times the place for me to start is with research. So bear with me if I share a little bit of the etymology of delight. It originates in the Latin delectare, to allure, which is related to delicious and delectable, which feel delicious and delectable coming off of the tongue. After delight takes a long and winding road through Latin, through French and Old and Middle English to the word we know, it gains a backspelling to match the word light, and that backspelling also begins to inform the meaning of the word and imbue it with a relationship to light and enlightenment. When Julie asked me if I would talk about this a while ago, on the top of my stack of long overdue library books was a book of reflections by poet and professor Ross Gay entitled The Book of Delights. He started on his 42nd birthday and wrote a little mini essay every day for a year about something that delighted him. So, of course, I wanted to take a deep dive into that. I was good, though. I returned my long overdue library copy, fine free for the win, especially for badly behaved librarians. And I bought a copy, so I could do all the things you're not supposed to do in library books, like dog-ear the pages and underline stuff and write stuff in the margins. Although when I buy a used book, if it has marginalia in it, that's something that is delightful to me. It means that the book was worthy of engagement, that there was a discussion back and forth between the words on the page and the reader. And so that's what I did on a long drive through Illinois. I had an engagement with this book. I devoured each essay and just looked up occasionally in between to confirm that, yes, Illinois is still flatter than flat, just punctuated occasionally with some big wind turbines. And the essays were delightful for a whole host of reasons. I want to share delight number 44 with you, which is entitled, Not Only the peacock that has landed in Ingrid's yard, whose long neck was what one might call dark turquoise, which would be a lamentable shorthand, for the iridescence makes it another color entirely, and reminds us how all color is a manifestation of, a meditation on, light. These mediations echoed or multiplied in the gauzy oculi looking skyward from its long tail. But Ingrid's need to share the photo with me as I was walking towards the buffet at Samira, the Afghan place, almost tugging me by the elbow to do so, using her index finger and thumb to zoom into its luminous neck, smiling and looking at it, smiling and looking at me looking at it, me smiling and looking at her looking at it, which is simply called sharing what we love, what we find beautiful, which is an ethics. That reminded me of one of my own poems, one that shares a childhood memory, set in Illinois, no less, and for me brings that feeling of discovery and delighting in it and delighting in sharing it right to the top of my mind. A thing to know about this is that the New Madrid seismic zone centers along the Mississippi in southern Missouri, and small earthquakes are often felt throughout southern Illinois. Carp quake. After dinner, we amble down the pasture, gathering dew, darkening Daddy's pant cuffs. I dance ahead, eager to display my discovery. Under the ripe summer moon, 3 massive carp plunge and veer, their scales rivet bright, tails threshing through the pond's green field. They're a far cry from the placid, dull as daylight sunfish, so stupid I can catch them on my pinky, flip them out onto the bank in a blue bottle flash. These are more like artifacts of another age, giant plated denizens of the Pleistocene deep, dancing a frenzied foxtrot across our muddy pond. My father's theory is the heat has brought them up. Then, as we turn for home, the grass ripples once beneath us, a rumbling wave of surging earth. We lurch like drunken sailors, floundering on fluid ground, while the carp ride out the cresting pond swell. Some of that actually happened, maybe at 2 separate times, but the combining of them brings me delight in remembering that moment with my dad. Some other subjects that I found delightful in the Book of Delights include crows, weeds, swearing, raccoon poo, and a pawpaw patch, which I am working on cultivating at my house. It's a little climate change experiment in the making. Something that I appreciated about each of Gay's essays is even when he's talking about desperately hard things like racism and illness and death, he's able to bring them into conversation with delight, even though those things are patently not delightful. When I last talked here last fall, I talked about wonder. And to begin with, I wondered for myself what the difference is between wonder and delight. Was there enough space for me to say anything that I didn't say last time? And when I thought about it, I found that for me, delight has an element of surprise in it, which is what, for me, separates it from happiness or joy. Delight is like a little aha moment that, if tended to properly, we can access over and over again. It allows for a savoring of wonder, of immersing ourselves in all the nooks and crannies of something that interests us, something that we find beautiful. Some people use photos to capture an experience or a moment, and I'm not a big one for photos, although it's super easy nowadays when we've all got a little camera in our back pocket. But mostly it just doesn't occur to me to take photos in the moment, whereas words do pop into my mind. Sometimes I'll take reference photos, but more as a memory aid, a jumping off point for building with words. I have pictures that I took on vacation of a recent delight, but they no longer resonate as much for me as the words that I use them as a tool to find for the experience. So my partner Dan and I are big bluegrass fans. Maybe it's more that I am, and he knows how delighted I am by it, so he humors me. We went in June to Owensboro, Kentucky for a festival called Romp. We've never been there before. And one afternoon there was a songwriting workshop with 3 musicians doing kind of a round robin style reflection, taking questions. And one of the musicians was Peter Rowan, who was one of Bill Monroe's bluegrass boys in the 60s. He's in his early 80s now, but he's still out there headlining festivals. He was one of the headliners for this festival, and supporting younger talent in his band. And I went to this workshop as a poet who knows that songwriting and poetry writing are 2 different but maybe allied beasts, like a leopard and a lion that meet and have a brief and splendid tango. I don't have any songwriting aspirations, although I am a singer, and I've set other people's words to music on occasion. So for me, the best part of this workshop was not so much the technical discussion of how do you get from, a bridge to a chorus, what is the songwriting essence. The best part of it for me was that we all sang together in the bluegrass tradition, back and forth, weaving yourself in and out of the song and finding your own part. Not being a part pig, because everybody will get a turn to shine. And we did. We sounded awesome. I took photos of it, but only so that they could help me later on get to the realization that I sang harmony with Bill Monroe once removed. Which isn't part of a poem, but it's part of my stockpile of delights that maybe will become a poem at some point, or maybe not. Also in my stockpile of delights are actual pigs, not just part pigs. They're one of my favorite animals. I've been a sometime pig keeper, and I can report that pigs are funny and personable, and also eventually tasty. Which is why I own an anthology of pig poems. I also really just love a good anthology. So last weekend I was paging through this looking for something that would fit in here today, and I found a perfect fit, which is a delight to read And afterwards, it gave me a little frisson of delight in the wondering and researching. It's entitled Sus, which is pig in Latin, and it's by Gary Snyder. Sus. Two pigs in a pickup sailing down the freeway, stomping with the sway, gaze back up the roadbed on their last windy ride. Big pink ears up, looking all around, taut, broad shoulders, trim little legs, bright and lively with their parsnip-colored skin, wind-washed earth diggers snuffling in the swamps. They're not pork. They are forever Sus, breeze-braced and standing there, eternal, velvet-dusty pigs. It's kind of a hard moment to give dignity to shipping an animal off for transformation to a different form. Part of what I appreciate about it is how Snyder manages to capture the beauty of the pig, which I find beautiful, but not everybody appreciates pigs as a thing of beauty. And it gives a little lift to that inevitable end and puts it on a more eternal plane. The part that really made me wonder and that I found delightful was about the title, Sus. So I took a little delve into the Latin and how it's transformed up to today. What it made me wonder about was the hog call, which, if you are a pig keeper, is a thing, and to the point where there are contests for hog calling. And the traditional call is Sue, here, pig, 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 pig. And I'd never really thought about that first part of it. Suey, what does that mean? Is it just a nonsense word? But seeing the title made me make a connection there that the Latin root has persisted across centuries, across languages, partially in the word sow, but still going strong in the hog call. The persistence of language and the fluidity of it is a delight for me, and it's the toolbox I get to play around in as a poet. And it follows from being curious and open to the world. I just listened to a podcast run by Dr. Dipesh Navsaria, who's the medical director of the Wisconsin division of Reach Out and Read, and he sits on the national board as well. He's a pediatrician who is also a children's librarian, which fits in perfectly with the Reach Out and Read mission, which is to support family sharing of books from a child's earliest days. So pediatricians at each child wellness check use picture books as a diagnostic tool to gauge where a child is at developmentally and be able to support parents in growing positive, affirming relationships that are building their child's brain. And at each checkup, kids go home with a book to keep, so their home library expands as they grow. This particular episode, Dr. Navsaria was talking to Brad Montague, who is the author of a book that I just checked out from the library, kind of by coincidental accident. It's called Becoming Better Grown-Ups, Rediscovering What Matters and Remembering How to Fly. I got two big takeaways that relate to delight from listening to this podcast, and I'm looking forward to getting into the book for more. The first thing was from Fred Rogers, who started a chapter in a textbook for ophthalmologists with the phrase, "You were a child once too." Montague draws connections between Mr. Rogers' work and his own work, which takes the form of doing a deep dive into listening, really listening to what children have to say and letting it inform how we as grown-ups live our lives going forward, and sharing what he has heard from children with other grown-ups so that we can all do better for the next generation. And conferring respect on someone that you are listening to, whether it be a child or an adult. The second little bit of the podcast that I found really delightful was Montague relates how he was invited to a kind of fancy awards dinner party and discovered that he was going to be seated next to Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor, and it made him feel a little terror and maybe an equal amount of delight, because he had watched her on Sesame Street with his own children. But how do you talk to someone that you've seen on Sesame Street and who at the same time has a seat of power in our country? He was particularly dreading the "so what do you do?" conversation. And then Justice Sotomayor asked the question in a completely unexpected way. She asked, "What do you love about what you do?" Which freed him up to share his passion for listening to kids and translating for the grown-ups in the room. The way that she asked that question made me think that it's a way of asking, what is it that delights you? And maybe that's the question I am always trying to answer as a writer. Sometimes the things I write about are not inherently delightful. Looking back at my recent things, I've found an awful lot of death and decay and decline in them. But working my way into the words that are right for a poem brings me delight, no matter what the subject matter is. And hopefully, as a reader, that comes out in my writing. It's like doing a jigsaw puzzle, figuring out what words chime when they're next to each other, what shape is the best shape for these words, building the exact right house of words for a poem to live in. Some of you might be writers too. Some of you are artists, photographers, musicians. But the one thing all artists need is an audience to listen and see and engage with the work. We're lucky we have a really vibrant, enthusiastic arts community of both artists and audience in this town. But that is luck based on all of us doing exactly what we're doing here, listening and sharing and building space for everyone to be seen and heard. I think the best part of both of my jobs as a librarian and a poet is the opportunity to encourage people of all ages to learn and share and discover wonder, to play, and then share the delight of play with others, because that's what sustains us when circumstances aren't so great. At a library program last week, we made a giant crystal garden with salt and bluing for everybody at the library to observe and enjoy. And the crystals grow and change just in the space of an hour, so every time you go back to it, it's different. Oftentimes, the same thing is true of a poem. You're a different reader than the last time you read it. So the delight of discovery and then rediscovery is there waiting for us. On that note, I'm going to end with a recent poem of mine. And I hope at Coffee and Conversation after service, I would love to hear what brings you delight. This last poem is called Suspicion. Early July, it stays light well past 9. Walking out to the hives for an evening perusal, offering my attention up for the one evening I didn't when the bear struck. I hear the cranes calling in the bottomland, intermittent and frantic, although how does one judge tone in a bugling bird? My guess is that they are fending off a fox or coyote intent on their colt, just now long-legging its way out of the nest, but not yet fledged and flight-worthy. Screen door open, they continue to call for an hour or more, and then stop. Should I be hopeful or resigned? Either way, nature takes its course. My only job is to notice. Thank you for letting me share.